A homeless puppy was found under a car. What happened next is incredible. It was the shrill cry that first caught my ear, a faint, tremulous whimper echoing through the suffocating silence of a blisteringly hot afternoon. The parking lot was mostly deserted, and the asphalt shimmered under the relentless sun. My eyes darted around, trying to pinpoint where the sound was coming from, but I saw nothing. Only stillness, scorching heat radiating in waves, and the muffled hum of distant traffic. The cry came again, more urgent this time, tugging at something deep inside my chest, something vulnerable, something helpless. Compelled by an inexplicable pull, I followed the noise, weaving between rows of cars whose hoods radiated enough heat to burn at the slightest touch. My heart pounded faster as the whimper grew louder. Then, as I knelt beside a battered blue sedan, I spotted him, a tiny, dirt-streaked puppy trembling under the car's chassis. His thin body was almost swallowed by the deep shadows, and his big, pleading eyes reflected equal parts terror and hope. It was as if he'd been waiting for me, for anyone, to step in before it was too late. I flattened myself against the scorching pavement, ignoring the sting on my arms. As I reached out slowly, the puppy recoiled in fear, letting out a desperate yelp that tore right through me. He looked so impossibly small, ears plastered down, tail tucked. His fur, once perhaps a warm caramel shade, was caked with grime and flecked with bits of gravel. I bit my lip, realizing that if I pulled him out hastily I might hurt him, or terrify him even more. But every instinct screamed that if I left him here, he might never emerge from his hiding place alive. After a few agonizing moments, I finally eased him from beneath the car. He was limp in my hands, too weak to resist, yet still trembling. His bones felt so fragile as if the slightest movement could snap them in two. My throat tightened. I glanced around, hoping someone else would appear, someone who knew exactly what to do. But there was no one. Only that burning sun, that heavy silence, and a tiny life in my hands. I rushed him into the shade of a near-empty awning. My heart drummed as I summoned the courage to examine him more closely. His ribs jutted alarmingly through his filthy coat. When I brushed aside a patch of matted fur, I discovered a large abrasion across his belly, raw and oozing. How he had gotten such a wound was anyone's guess. Maybe a car had nicked him, maybe he'd been attacked by something bigger, or maybe it was just the cruel residue of living on the streets. Either way, his entire being was soaked with fear and desperation, and I felt an overwhelming urge to help in whatever way I could. A wave of guilt washed over me. I had zero experience with rescuing animals. Sure, I loved dogs, but I had no real resources. My home was a cramped apartment, my job kept me on the move, and I knew nothing about what it took to care for a traumatized animal. But what choice did I have? I couldn't bear the thought of leaving him behind. I wrapped him gingerly in my jacket, though I knew he needed immediate medical attention. By some miracle, there was a veterinary clinic a short walk away. My legs shook as I half walked, half jogged, cradling this trembling bundle in my arms. Time seemed to slow to a delirious crawl, the sun forging a path of sweat down my forehead. It was hard to tell whose heart was pounding louder, his or mine. When I burst through the clinic doors, a jolt of cool air hit me, a stark contrast to the furnace outside. Before anyone could ask questions, I blurted out, "Help me, this puppy is hurt." The receptionist's eyes widened in alarm, and within seconds, a vet in a white coat materialized, ushering me into an examination room. I laid the puppy on a stainless steel table that seemed far too sterile and cold for a life so fragile. The next minutes were a whirlwind of activity. Needles, disinfectants, gentle hands checking wounds. My heart felt like it was lodged in my throat. I had never been so invested in another living being's fate before. It terrified and awakened me all at once. Though I couldn't understand the vet's quiet instructions to her assistant, something about hydration, possible infection, my anxiety soared. All I understood was that this was serious. Finally, the vet turned to me, her eyes not unkind. He's malnourished, and there's a nasty infection on his belly. He's fighting, but it's going to be tough." She paused, as if uncertain whether to continue. "He'll need round-the-clock care, medication, and potentially surgery if the infection spreads. Are you prepared for that?" I swallowed hard. I had never been less prepared for anything in my life. My pockets were nearly empty, my lease didn't allow pets, and I had no clue how to nurse such a wounded soul back to health. But as I looked at him, his eyes fluttering, breath rattling with fragile desperation, my doubts evaporated. "Yes," I found myself saying, voice quivering with a resolve I didn't quite comprehend. "Whatever it takes." Days melted into nights in that tiny clinic room. The staff taught me how to administer antibiotics, how to keep his wound clean, and how to bottle feed a puppy who was too weak to stand. Despite the constant beep of machines and the smell of antiseptics, a bond began to form between us. Sometimes, he would open his eyes and stare right into mine with an intensity that stole my breath. Other times, he would whimper in his sleep, paws twitching as if he were running from some nightmare. And every moment I spent by his side, I felt something I'd never experienced before. A sense of profound responsibility tinged with love and fear. A few days in, he nearly slipped away. His fever spiked, and he stopped responding to the bottle. The vet said it might be the infection overwhelming his frail system. My eyes stung with tears as he lay there, breath ragged, no longer trying to wriggle away from the gentle hands that tended him. I prayed, though I wasn't even sure I believed in prayer. I just begged the universe, let him live. Give him a chance. And then, as if responding to those silent pleas, his fever broke in the early hours of the morning, and by sunrise, he was lapping at a mixture of puppy formula and warm water. The vet called it a miracle. I called it hope. The entire clinic staff seemed to share in that small victory, exchanging relieved smiles as though they'd seen something extraordinary. The relief was momentary, though, because survival was just the first step. Once the immediate danger passed, his true struggles emerged. He was terrified of every movement, every shadow. Thunderstorms outside the clinic made him tremble uncontrollably, and even the softest human voice often sent him cowering into a corner. Each new day was a hurdle, each sudden noise a reminder of the chaos and trauma he'd endured. The only time he seemed remotely at peace was when he was asleep, or when he sensed my presence and recognized my voice. I whispered to him often, telling him stories about how life could be different, how he'd one day run through a yard, tail wagging, carefree in the sun. I wasn't sure if he understood, but a part of me believed he did. He would rest his small head against my hand, eyes drooping in something resembling peace. Those moments lit a tiny ember of faith in me, the promise that maybe, just maybe, this was all worth it. Yet with each passing week came fresh dilemmas. The vet bills piled up, overshadowing my meager savings. My landlord, upon hearing I'd been caring for a stray dog, left me a pointed voicemail warning that animals weren't allowed in the building. My boss, sympathetic at first, began to grow impatient with my frequent absences. It seemed like I was juggling a series of fragile plates, and at any second they might all come crashing down. And in the midst of it all, there was this puppy, learning how to walk again without pain, learning how to trust again in a world that had nearly destroyed him. Hope blossomed on a crisp morning when the clinic announced he was stable enough to leave. Not fully healed, but he needed a quieter environment and someone who could watch him closely. The vet gave me a small bag of medication and strict instructions, weekly checkups, gentle exercise, and a balanced diet. I thanked her with tears threatening to spill down my cheeks, overwhelmed by gratitude and anxiety in equal measure. Bringing him home felt surreal. I carried him up 3 flights of stairs, feeling his tiny heartbeat against my chest. Stepping into my cramped apartment, I realized just how small my world really was. A single living room joined to a kitchenette, a threadbare couch, and a bedroom that barely fit a bed. But for the first time, it didn't feel lonely or inadequate. It felt like a sanctuary. I set him down carefully on a plush old towel, and he sniffed the floor tentatively, as though everything might vanish if he took more than a couple of steps. I knew I was on borrowed time. My landlord's tolerance was fragile at best, but I felt I had no choice. Abandoning him now was unimaginable, so I went through each day navigating two worlds. The world of my job, where deadlines loomed and superiors demanded results, and the private world of hushed nights, where I read articles on dog behavior, guided him through gentle rehabilitation exercises, and comforted him through nightmares that left him yelping in the dark. His spirit was a mosaic of scars and resilience. Some days, he wagged his tail at the simplest things, like the sound of kibble rattling in a bowl or a soft blanket to curl up on. Other days, a sudden noise from the hallway would send him scrambling beneath the couch, whimpering as if the entire world had turned against him. I often found myself lying on the floor, coaxing him with soft words, tears welling up when he finally dared to peek out an inch closer. Time slipped by in this delicate dance. Weeks turned into a month, and little by little he gained weight. The infection scar healed over, leaving a patch of bare skin on his belly. His coat, once dull and dirty, began to show a subtle shine. And his eyes, those same frightened eyes I first glimpsed under that car, started to reflect curiosity instead of terror. It was an indescribable joy to watch the transformation. Then came the unexpected day I managed to coax him out for a walk. I'd purchased a tiny harness that he despised at first, squirming and yipping as I tried to put it on. But once we stepped onto the sidewalk, the sunshine seemed to enchant him. He paused every few steps, sniffing at the air, the concrete, the grass poking through cracks in the pavement. This was a brand new universe for him, one that he was finally brave enough to explore. Of course, we had our setbacks. One evening, a loud truck backfired, sending him into a trembling meltdown that lasted hours. He refused to eat that night, cowering in my closet with a haunted look. Another night, the neighbor's cat got into the hallway and hissed at him, causing him to yelp in terror and bolt back inside. Each time my heart broke to see him so frightened, but each time he somehow found the courage to come out again, to nudge my hand as if silently asking, "Is it safe now? Can I trust again?" Despite the progress, an ominous cloud loomed over us, the threat of eviction. My landlord was done waiting. I'd promised I'd rehome the puppy, but every day I stalled, telling myself I'd do it tomorrow, then the next day. The truth was, the mere thought of giving him up made me feel sick. We'd come so far, and though I'd never intended to have a dog, especially not one with such extensive needs, I couldn't fathom letting him go to someone else. Would they understand his triggers? Would they be patient on nights when his nightmares returned? Would they have the resources to handle the emotional cost of his trauma? But as the second month neared, my landlord knocked on my door, voice tight with frustration. "Listen," he said, not unkindly but firmly. "We all have rules for a reason, and I've been lenient, but the dog's got to go." Panic surged. My heart hammered in my chest, and I felt a bead of sweat trickle down my temple. My little friend, sensing my distress, slunk behind the couch. "I just need a bit more time," I begged, voice cracking. "He's almost ready for adoption. I'm just looking for the right home." The landlord's face softened barely. "1 week," he replied, turning on his heel. "After that, I'm sorry, but you'll both be out of here." Despair weighed heavily on me after he left. I stared at my phone, searching rescue listings, fosters, anyone who might take him in. My chest tightened with each call that went unanswered or each volunteer who explained they were already full. Time raced faster than ever as that final deadline loomed. One night, in a haze of hopelessness, I took him for a walk. It was late, the streets relatively quiet except for a few passing cars and a gentle breeze rustling through the trees. I let him sniff around a small patch of grass near a playground, remembering how, not so long ago, he lay trembling under a car, clinging to life. Overwhelmed by the feeling that all our hard-fought battles might be undone, I sank onto a bench, pressing my face into my hands. Suddenly, He nudged my leg, his little head tilted in a way that almost looked like concern. I looked down, tears burning my eyes. That small, soulful gaze was filled with a tenderness I couldn't quite fathom. In that instant, the raw beauty of it all caught me. He was a mirror for everything fragile and resilient in me, a living symbol of second chances. The world had nearly broken him, but he survived. Maybe I could find a way to keep him after all, but that hope was overshadowed by practicality. Could I even afford a place that allowed pets? My job barely covered rent here. My mind spun with doubts, yet the spark of determination wouldn't go out. This little life had taught me more about perseverance, love, and sacrifice than anything in my adult years. If he could find the courage to trust and heal, maybe I could find the courage to fight for a place where we could both breathe freely. With only 2 days left until our landlord's deadline, the final blow came. I lost my job. They said it was due to downsizing, too many hours missed, too many times I'd left early to care for an animal. My mind reeled. It felt like the universe had slammed a door in my face. That night I sat in the hush of my apartment, tears streaming down my cheeks. I didn't have enough money for rent, let alone a new place, and rehoming him felt like tearing out a piece of my heart. Drained, I curled up on the floor next to him, resting my hand on his soft, warm belly. He licked my fingers, an innocent gesture of comfort that nearly broke me. "I'm sorry," I whispered, voice cracking. "I promise to keep you safe, but I don't know if I can." He just kept licking my hand, no judgment, just an acceptance that humbled me. The next day, I sold what few valuables I had, an old gaming console, some electronics, and a few pieces of jewelry inherited from a distant aunt. It wasn't much, but it might buy us enough time for a motel stay. I spent hours online, scanning freelance gigs, anything that might bring in quick cash. The stress was suffocating. Yet every time I glanced at him, I remembered how close he had been to death, how he'd survived. In that silent companionship, I found flickers of resolve to keep going. At last, I managed to find a small, run-down apartment in a neighboring town. The landlord there was more lenient about pets, though the place itself was a far cry from comfortable. It smelled of mold, the walls were stained, and a single flickering overhead light cast eerie shadows on the peeling wallpaper. But at least it was somewhere we wouldn't be separated. I used the last of my resources to pay the deposit, grateful that this new landlord didn't do a thorough background check or credit screening. On the final night in my old apartment, as I packed the last of my belongings into a few cardboard boxes, I felt a cocktail of emotions. Relief that we'd have a roof over our heads, sadness at leaving behind the only home I'd known for years, and fear about what lay ahead. I looked around the bare room and recalled the first night I brought him here, so small and fragile on that tattered towel. Now he padded around on sturdier legs, sniffing at the empty corners as if saying goodbye. Moving day was chaotic. My car, a battered hatchback, barely fit my boxes. We made the trip in one load. The entire drive, he sat on the passenger seat, ears perked at the unfamiliar cityscape zooming past the window. There was an anxious tremor in his little body, but every now and then, he'd glance my way as though seeking reassurance that we were doing the right thing. Stepping into the new apartment was like stepping into another life. The dank smell assaulted our noses, and the dim light revealed roaches scurrying under the cracked linoleum. My throat tightened with dread. This was no place for a new beginning, but I reminded myself, it was temporary, a stepping stone, something to keep us safe until I could find better employment, a better home. That night, as we settled onto a thin mattress I dragged into the living room, we heard scuffles and creaks from the upstairs unit. The pipes moaned when the neighbors ran their water. Everything about the place felt like it was on the verge of collapse. My puppy, still unnamed because, in some strange way, I was afraid naming him would seal our attachment, curled up against me. He seemed just as unsettled, but he didn't run or hide. Instead, he pressed his warm body close, as if bracing me for whatever challenges came next. Over the ensuing days, I frantically searched for any job that would take me. Bartending, waiting tables, part-time retail. I had some luck at a diner that needed an overnight dishwasher. It was far from ideal, the pay minimal, but it was enough for groceries and to keep the lights on. Meanwhile, my puppy adapted to this new place. He explored corners, sniffed at old pipes, jumped at every unusual noise, but gradually he calmed. I took him out for walks around the block. The neighborhood was rough, but he seemed enthralled by the new smells and the distant barking of other dogs. It was on one such walk, about 2 weeks after we'd moved, that everything changed. I was trudging home at dawn after a grueling overnight shift. He trotted by my side, tail swishing. My eyes were half-lidded with exhaustion, so I barely noticed a figure approaching until it was almost upon us. A young man, hoodie pulled low, stepped directly into my path. My heart slammed against my ribs. "Nice dog," he said, voice too smooth, too curious. I swallowed, tugging the leash closer. "Thanks," I replied, trying to sidestep him. He didn't move. A glint in his eyes set off alarm bells in my head. "Could use a dog like that," he muttered, gaze flicking to the puppy. The puppy, sensing my unease, backed up with a low whine. My pulse skyrocketed. Something about this stranger radiated danger. I tried to remain calm. "He's not for sale," I said firmly. The man's lips curled into a sneer. He took a step closer, making my breath catch. My puppy cowered behind my legs, trembling. "Everything's for sale," the man said, voice dripping with menace. I realized with a sickening twist in my gut that this wasn't just an idle conversation. This man might try to take him, who knows for what purpose. Dog fighting, a quick flip for cash. My imagination spiraled in a heartbeat. "No," I repeated, louder this time, and forced myself to walk past him. My mind was ablaze with fear. What if he followed us? To my immense relief, the stranger didn't pursue. But I could feel his eyes boring into my back long after we rounded the corner. My hands shook violently as we stumbled into the safety of the apartment building. The puppy pressed his body against my legs, sensing the adrenaline surging through me. I sank down on the staircase, arms wrapped around him, trying to catch my breath. That moment underscored just how vulnerable we were, living in a rough neighborhood with minimal income and no backup plan. Shaken by the encounter, I knew I had to do something different. This wasn't sustainable. We needed a safer environment. My mind raced, searching for answers. That night, I rummaged through my meager savings, scoured job listings online, and even drafted a help needed post on social media, detailing our story in hopes that someone might know of a better living situation or an opportunity. In a surprising twist, the post went viral, at least locally. Friends shared it, then their friends, and soon strangers reached out, offering small donations or job leads. The raw, emotional plea for help, accompanied by a photo of my puppy's soulful eyes, touched hearts. A local reporter reached out, asking if she could do a small human interest piece about us. Initially, I was embarrassed at the thought of our struggles becoming public, but desperation trumped pride. I agreed. The reporter arrived at my dingy apartment with a camera operator. She was kind, her eyes reflecting genuine empathy as she interviewed me about how I found him and what we'd been through to stay together. My puppy hovered near my feet, quivering under the bright lights, but she spoke to him softly, coaxing him into a moment of calm. When I described his near-death encounter under the car, the sleepless nights at the vet clinic, and our subsequent eviction, her eyes glistened with tears. The camera operator caught every detail: the worn furniture, the peeling paint, the unwavering way I held my puppy close. Within days, that broadcast aired on local TV. I barely watched it, too nervous about how it would come across, but the response was immediate and profound. Emails poured in from viewers who wanted to help. Some offered supplies, dog food, or old blankets. Others offered job leads or even a temporary place to stay. Still others sent emotional messages of support, sharing stories of their own rescues. It was overwhelming. Strangers showed more compassion in a few days than I had felt in years. It renewed a sense of hope that perhaps I wasn't alone in this fight. Among the messages was one from an older woman named. She explained that she ran a small rescue farm on the outskirts of the city, a sprawling property where she took in abandoned or abused animals of all kinds. She had an opening for someone to help care for the animals in exchange for room and a small stipend. It was a modest living arrangement, but it came with no pet restrictions and plenty of open space. My heart pounded as I read her message twice, then thrice. It sounded too good to be true. Still, the thought of wide-open fields, fresh air, and a safe environment made my chest swell with excitement. And it wasn't just about me. It was about giving my puppy a place to run free and heal fully, far from the dangers of city streets. I called that very evening. Her voice was warm and motherly. We spoke for nearly an hour discussing the logistics. She couldn't offer much pay, but she could give us a small cabin on her land, rent-free, in exchange for my work with the animals. It felt like fate. Within 2 weeks, I packed our meager belongings into my car once again. The day we left that dingy apartment behind, I felt a sense of cautious optimism. The drive out of the city was long, but the tension in my shoulders eased as skyscrapers gave way to rolling hills. My puppy lay curled in the passenger seat, occasionally lifting his head to peer at fields of green stretching out beside the highway. It was as if the entire world was opening up for us. When we finally arrived at its rescue farm, I was greeted by the sound of chickens clucking and the sight of a faded red barn perched against a brilliant blue sky. The air smelled of hay and earth, so different from the city's exhaust fumes. Herself was waiting by a wooden fence, dressed in overalls, silver hair tied in a loose braid. She smiled broadly, waving us over as a few horses grazed in the distance. I stepped out of the car, heart thumping with gratitude and apprehension. She took my hand in both of hers. "Welcome home," she said simply, her voice full of warmth. The lump in my throat prevented me from replying right away. She led me around, giving me a tour of the property. There were rows of rescue kennels filled with dogs of every shape and size, some missing a leg, some with scars on their faces, each with a story as harrowing as my puppy's. She introduced me to cats that roamed freely, rescued goats with worn collars, and even a donkey who followed us with curious eyes. The land stretched out for acres, dotted with tall grass and patches of wildflowers. It felt like a sanctuary of second chances. Our new home was a small log cabin near the back of the property. Inside, it was simple but clean: a bed, a small kitchen area, and a cozy fireplace. Explained that there was no internet yet, but she promised to help set it up once we were settled. For the first time in months, I felt something like peace blossom in my chest. My puppy, however, seemed overwhelmed by all the new sights and smells. He cowered at first, pressing himself against my legs whenever a new dog approached. But the farm dogs, accustomed to newcomers, gave him space, reassured me that in time he'd relax, and that maybe he could even help socialize the more anxious rescues, given his own background. It felt almost poetic, the idea of him paying it forward once he found his confidence. The days found a new rhythm. At sunrise, I'd help feed the horses and clean the stalls, all under patient guidance. Then I'd walk the rows of kennels, greeting the rescued dogs with gentle words. My puppy would tag along, peeking into cages, tail wagging shyly at those who didn't bark too loudly. Eventually, he grew bold enough to sniff noses through the chain-link fences, a hesitant but heartwarming display of curiosity. Afternoons were dedicated to chores around the property, mending fences, gathering eggs, tidying the barn. In the evenings, we'd sit around a rough wooden table, sharing a simple meal. We'd tell stories of the animals she'd saved over the years, stories of heartbreak and resilience, each culminating in a glimmer of hope. Sometimes, my puppy would curl at my feet, eyes half closed, as if lulled by the calm routine that had replaced our once chaotic existence. It was a simple life, but it was purposeful. Each animal had its own saga of survival, and caring for them filled me with a sense of gratitude. I watched my puppy flourish in this environment. He ran around in open fields, discovered the joy of rolling in soft grass, and even made a canine friend, a gentle golden retriever named Sunny, whose patience and calm nature helped him feel at ease. Yet deep down, I couldn't forget the precariousness of it all. The farm depended on donations, and hinted that finances were always tight. I contributed what I could from my small stipend, and sometimes I'd stay up late brainstorming ways to help the rescue flourish, organizing a small fundraiser, setting up social media profiles to attract donors, or contacting local businesses to partner with us. My mind buzzed with the realization that I'd found a calling larger than myself. Weeks turned into months, and the farm thrived under unwavering dedication. She marveled at how well my puppy had recovered, not just physically, but emotionally. The once terrified stray I'd found under a car was now bounding across fields, wagging his tail with pure joy. He even started greeting visitors, families that came to adopt an animal, with hesitant but genuine friendliness. Then, one crisp autumn morning, the miracle happened, an event so extraordinary it felt like the culmination of all the love and struggle that had brought us here. I was out on the far side of the property, doing my daily inspection of the fences, when I heard frantic barking. It was coming from a wooded area just beyond the pasture. My heart leapt into my throat. Something was wrong. Without hesitation, I dropped what I was doing and sprinted toward the sound. I found my puppy perched at the edge of a small ravine, barking wildly. When I approached, he whimpered, glancing at me and then at something below. Carefully, I peered into the ravine and saw a young fawn, trapped amid branches and debris. The poor creature was trembling, eyes wide with terror. My puppy looked at me, barking again in urgent appeal, as though saying, "Help it like you helped me." Adrenaline surged through my veins. I slipped down the slope, mud slick beneath my boots. The fawn jerked in panic, nearly tumbling further into the tangle of branches. Step by step, I moved closer, mindful of the mother deer that might be nearby. But time was of the essence. This little life was in dire trouble. My puppy whimpered above me, pacing along the rim of the ravine, ears perked, tail stiff. When I got close enough, I saw the fawn had a deep scrape along its flank, likely from crashing into the branches. Blood trickled down its leg. Carefully, I removed enough debris to free it from the worst of the entanglement, coaxing it with soft murmurs. The fawn's chest heaved, as if it couldn't decide whether to fight or flee. With painstaking gentleness, I lifted it in my arms, ignoring the scrapes on my own skin. My heart pounded, every sense on high alert. Somehow, I made it back up the slope with the fawn still cradled against me, trembling. My puppy ran circles around me, as if celebrating. Once on level ground, I laid the fawn down gently. I pulled out my phone and called, breathless. She directed me to bring the fawn back to the barn where she'd call a wildlife. Slowly, mindful of not aggravating its injuries, I started walking. The entire way, my puppy never left my side, occasionally nudging the fawn's leg or sniffing its snout. It was an odd, beautiful scene. The once homeless puppy, wagging his tail and offering comfort to another helpless creature. My eyes burned with emotion, recalling how he'd been in that very position, broken, lost, waiting for a savior. Now he was the one doing the saving. Back at the barn, took charge. She'd arranged for it to come by and transport the fawn to a specialized facility. We cleaned its wound gently, and marveled at how calm the fawn seemed in my puppy's presence. When they arrived, a woman with kind eyes and a soothing voice, she said she'd never seen a dog quite so gentle and empathetic toward a wild animal. The bond they share is remarkable, she noted quietly, stroking the fawn's head. It's as if your dog understands exactly what the little one is going through. I swallowed hard, overcome by emotion. It was no coincidence. My puppy did know. He'd been there himself. The carefully placed the fawn in a padded crate, and as she closed the door, I felt the culmination of an incredible journey. The puppy found under a car, now paying forward the miracle he'd received. Word of the rescue spread quickly through local circles, especially after told the story of how a once rescued stray dog had helped save a baby deer. A local newspaper picked it up, then another. Soon, social media lit up again, this time with a story of hope. Homeless puppy becomes hero, rescues fawn. People were enchanted by the notion that the powerless can become powerful, that those once broken can play a key role in healing others. As for me, it felt like a validation of all the struggles we'd gone through. The vet bills, the eviction, the sleepless nights, the fear and uncertainty. Watching him stand guard as this van pulled away, I felt an overwhelming sense of pride. He looked so confident, so steadfast, as if he had finally discovered his own purpose in this world. In the weeks that followed, donations to farm increased, allowing her to expand her kennels and improve facilities. People from neighboring states reached out, wanting to meet this extraordinary puppy hero. Though he'd grown quite a bit, I realized I still hadn't given him a name. One morning, as he accompanied me on our usual rounds, I knelt and scratched his ears. His expression was so warm, so open, that I felt like the name Chance fit perfectly. It represented the second chance he got, and the second chance he gave to so many others. When I said it aloud, Chance, his ears perked up, as though he recognized it in his soul. From that day on, Chance thrived more than ever. He'd trot alongside me at sunrise, greeting each new day as a fresh opportunity. He showed no hesitation around large animals, horses, cows, the donkey. And the other dogs, especially the new rescues, gravitated toward him. It was as if he radiated some sort of quiet empathy they could sense. I often caught him curling up beside a terrified newcomer, offering his presence as comfort. There was no question. Chance had become a beacon of hope here. Of course, life being what it is, we still faced challenges. Vet bills for the rescue animals were endless, and sometimes the property needed urgent repairs, a roof leak or a broken fence. I also lived with the reality that this fragile piece could be toppled if donations dried up. Yet each hardship felt more surmountable now, bolstered by a sense of community that had around our story, and by the knowledge that miracles could and did happen. Chance's fame continued to grow in small ways. Local news segments, heartfelt social media posts that circulated among animal lovers. People visited the farm, some adopting dogs or cats, others just wanting to see him. Always humble, used the attention to advocate for more rescues, encouraging those who visited to open their homes to animals in need. The synergy was uplifting, a testament to how one single act of compassion, pulling a puppy from under a car, could ripple outward in unimaginable ways. Eventually, the day came when they returned to the farm, wearing a gentle smile. "I have someone here who wants to see your dog," she said cryptically. My brow furrowed, but I followed her to her truck, heart pounding. When she opened the back, there stood the fawn, now much steadier on its feet. Its wound was healed, the fur growing back over the once raw patch. The fawn gazed around with wide, alert eyes. "Ready for release," she said softly, indicating the farmland that stretched behind us. "I thought it might be fitting for your dog to be here. He's part of why this fawn is alive." Emotions welled in my chest, so strong I could barely speak. We led the fawn to a clearing near the tree line. Chance followed closely, ears pricked, tail wagging in a slow, curious sweep. As they removed the harness that had been supporting the fawn's injured leg, we all held our breath. For a moment the fawn stood frozen, sniffing the air. Then, with a tentative leap, it darted a few yards away. It paused to glance back at us, at Chance, before bounding into the forest, disappearing amid shafts of golden sunlight. I exhaled a shaky breath, tears gathering at the corners of my eyes. Chance barked once, a hopeful, joyous sound. I couldn't help but wonder if that fawn would find its mother, or if it would wander these woods on its own. But I knew this was nature's way: release, independence, survival. and it wouldn't have been possible without the resilience of a puppy who had once been close to death himself. The moment carried a sacred quality, as though the farm itself held its breath in reverence. The placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "You've both done something extraordinary, thank you." I smiled through the tears. "No, thank you for everything." She nodded, then left us to the hush of the meadow. As I walked back to the barn, Chance at my side, I felt a kind of serenity I'd never known before. Once, I was certain I'd hit rock bottom, desperate, broke, clutching a wounded dog as the world closed in. Yet that very struggle led me here, where each sunrise felt like a blessing, where a ragtag farm thrived on compassion, and where a once homeless puppy had discovered a life full of purpose and love. In the following days, word of the fawn's release spread, further cementing Chance's reputation as a miracle dog. Adoption inquiries at the farm soared and received more offers of financial support. But for me, the true miracle was far more intimate. Learning that the most broken among us can become the greatest healers, that adversity can pave the way for grace, and that love has the power to transform fear into hope. As the seasons turned, the farm and everyone in it continued their journeys of healing and growth. Sometimes, on quiet nights, I'd remember the scorching day I first heard that faint cry under a car, how my life veered off its predictable path in an instant. If I had walked by without listening to that whimper, I would missed out on one of the most profound relationships and lessons life could offer. And so the story goes on. Chance still prances through fields each morning, greeting each new rescue with soft eyes and a wagging tail. I still rise before dawn to feed horses, check on the cats, and fix fences. We live each day with an appreciation for life's fragile wonders, and whenever I feel doubt or fear creeping in, I look at Chance and remember the incredible journey we've shared. It's a journey of transformation that began with a single, anguished cry from beneath a car, a cry that sparked empathy, courage, and a miraculous chain of events. Who would have guessed that a lonely, homeless puppy, abandoned, broken, and so close to oblivion, would emerge as a beacon of hope, not just for me, but for an entire farm, countless other animals, and even a wounded fawn? And who would have imagined that in saving him, I'd also save myself, finding a purpose and a calling that transcended every hardship? In the end, that is the real miracle. Not just that one tiny life can be saved, but that it can ripple out to touch so many others, inspiring compassion, unity, and a belief that second chances are real. Because once you've seen such a remarkable transformation, once you've witnessed that spark of life refuse to be extinguished, you can never go back to believing that the impossible remains impossible. And that truly is something worth sharing with the world.